All right. You know, I think I'm going to switch things up around a bit today. Instead of starting out with praise reports and prayer requests, I'm just going to go on into the sermon, and then I'm going to close us out with the announcements and praise reports. So I'm going to continue in with the Q&A sermon series, and the question that was asked this week was basically if the new heaven and new earth was 1,400 miles long and wide. So how is that going to hold everyone? Um, so let's start out with the verse in question, which is Revelation 21:16. Said the city was laid out like a square, as long as it was wide. He measured the city with the rod and found it to be 12,000 stadia in length and as wide and high as it is long. A stadia uh, is an ancient Greek word meaning a unit of length equivalent to about 607 feet or 185 meters. So with which 12,000 stadia will equal to about 1,400 miles or about 2,200 kilometers. Um, for example, in 2 Corinthians 4, the dimensions of the Bronze Sea and Solomon's Temple are given in cubits, which is the diameter measuring 10 cubits and the circumference measuring 30 cubits would equate to about 15 to 16 stadia. In the book of Ezekiel, dimensions of areas of the temple are given in reeds and stadia. Uh, Ezekiel 40 to 48, for example, the outer court of the temple is described as having a length of 100 cubits and a width of 50 cubits, which would equal to about 6 to 7 stadia in length and 3 to 4 stadia in width. So to give to a good insight about how big that would be, like one stadia, which is 200-meter track length. Two stadia would be the size of an ancient Olympic stadium length. 10 stadia would be about a men's 10,000-meter race. And then 20 stadia is like an Olympic marathon distance. So, I'm not good at math, but if I read it correctly, the size of 1,400 stadia would be, if you were to imagine a cube of this earth, it would stretch from Canada to Mexico, and then from the Appalachian Mountains to the California border. That would cover a ground level area of nearly 2 million square miles, which is roughly 40 times the size of England and 15,000 times the size of London. That's a pretty good size for a new heaven. And it says in that heaven in John 14:2, says, "In my Father's house there are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you." And of course, not really part of the size of this, but one of the verses that Pastor David and I haven't really seen eye to eye on was Revelation 21:1, where it says, "Now I saw a new heaven and earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. Also, there was no more sea." He and others will see it as there's not going to be any more oceans or salt water. But I believe there's going to be a new sea along with the new heaven and new earth. Um, I look at it as because there's still going to be a new body of water, which is in the next chapter, Revelation 22, where it says, "And he showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding from the throne of God and of Lamb. In the middle of its street, and on either side of the river, was the tree of life, which bore 12 fruits, each tree yielding its fruit every month." But that's really beside the point. for this sermon today, but that could be, a sermon for another day. But back to the question at hand, how will the new heaven hold everyone? The sad but truth of it is not every one of us is going to be on the new heaven. Matthew 7:21 states, "Not everyone who calls me Lord, Lord will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only those who do what my Father in heaven wants them to do." Right now on earth there are 8.3 billion people, and Revelation 7:3-4 says, "Do not harm the land or the sea or the trees until we put a seal on the foreheads of the servants of our God." Then I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 from all the tribes of Israel. Right there alone is 144,000 servants of God during the tribulation will be in heaven, and that doesn't include the believers and the ones who are saved and who have accepted Jesus as their Lord and Savior. So, if you take away the 144,000 from 8.3 billion, that leaves 8 billion, 299, 856 billion. But Revelations 7:9 says, "After this I looked, and there was an enormous crowd. No one could count all the people. They were from every race, tribe, nation, and language. They stood in front of the throne and of the Lamb, dressed in white robes, holding palm branches in their hands." And then Zechariah 13:8 says, "In the whole land, declares the Lord, 2/3 will be struck down and perish, yet 1/3 will be left in it." So if a third of the 8,299 number, a third of that would be around 2,766, 666.67 billion people that will be in the new earth. Of course, I'm terrible at math, so I have no idea if I got that right or not. So don't quote me on that. But the Bible, however, doesn't give an exact number. It just says, there's going to be an enormous crowd. But really, all the people that are going to be there are the people that have believed and asked Jesus to be their, the Lord and their Savior. And the cool thing about that is that just to get there, there's no works involved. Jesus, he already paid it all on the cross as a gift to those who do believe. So let's just say, for example, my math was correct. It's a strange feeling to think that out of the 8 billion people on earth today, that only just that 2 billion of them will be in heaven, and the rest are sadly going to perish and are just going to turn into ash and smoke. So to close out the sermon today, I'm just going to quote two of my favorite movies just for the fun of it. The first quote was being from Terminator 2, where Sarah Connor says, "Every day from this day is a gift. Use it well." And then from the Shawshank Redemption, where Andy Dufresne says, "Get busy living or get busy dying." So as I close out that sermon, does anybody have anything they would like to say or share before we go into the announcements?